My mom and sister treated my dad badly after he passed away. They told me, "You inherit Dad's $2 million debt." I said, "Okay." A few months later, they were shocked after my father suddenly passed away from an unexpected illness, leaving behind a staggering $2 million debt. My mother and sister, Tina, took matters into their own hands. They decided how to handle my father's inheritance without consulting me, leaving me to bear the brunt of the debt. My frustration with them reached a boiling point, but the thought of their future struggles made me smirk inwardly. I was a 24-year-old single man working as a nursery teacher at a daycare. I graduated from a junior college and had always lived at home with my father, mother, and my sister, Tina, who was close to my age. Since childhood, Tina and I hadn't gotten along. A graduate of a prestigious university, Tina looked down on me for my junior college education. Her arrogance was matched by her frequent mockery of my modest personality and average looks. "With your plain appearance and lack of impressive credentials, who would ever want to date you?" she would sneer. In reality, I did have a girlfriend, but I kept this a secret to avoid provoking Tina's scorn. Tina's sarcasm used to sting, but those days were long behind me. I now took great pride in my work as a nursery teacher, finding immense joy in interacting with children and watching them grow. Tina's words no longer fazed me. My mother, who revered Tina for her prestigious university degree, constantly boasted about her to relatives and neighbors. In stark contrast, I was often treated as an afterthought. It was clear that my mother favored Tina and showered her with preferential treatment. Unlike her, my father always had my back. Whenever my mother gave snacks exclusively to Tina, my father would secretly share the same treats with me. He proudly expressed his admiration for my choice to become a nursery teacher, and I deeply cherished his supportive gestures and words. My father was the CEO of a small company where Tina also worked. Unfortunately, the company's financial situation had been deteriorating recently. Despite my father's relentless efforts to cut the deficit and his late nights at the office, Tina remained indifferent. "I can't work for a company run by someone who looks so inept," Tina said, resigning from the company to take a position elsewhere. Since her marriage, my mother had stopped working and fully dedicated herself to managing the household. With no experience in supporting my father's business, she didn't grasp the challenges he faced. Despite witnessing his daily struggles, she criticized him for the company's lack of success. "The company is still struggling. If you don't resolve the deficit soon, I won't be able to buy that new bag from the magazine. Honestly, what are you doing every day? You're completely useless," my mother said. She had an insatiable appetite for spending, especially on luxury items, often making impulsive purchases. Her dismissive attitude toward my father, as if she couldn't see the value of his hard work, filled me with outrage. Though I wasn't a business expert, I'd witnessed my father's tireless efforts from a young age and understood how challenging it was to manage a business. My mother, who had been with him for years, should have recognized this as well. I couldn't fathom why she would blame him as though he were incompetent. One day, my frustration boiled over, and I confronted my mother, demanding she stop belittling my father. Her response was dismissive and condescending. "Why should I be scolded by someone like you? People without an education should keep their opinions to themselves. Don't speak on things you don't understand," she retorted. Tina, seemingly influenced by my mother's attitude, joined in and criticized me harshly. It was clear that despite sharing the same blood, our values and personalities were worlds apart. "Mark, don't let their words affect you. Education doesn't define your worth. Take pride in your role as a nursery teacher. That's what truly matters," my father said. His words of encouragement warmed my heart and bolstered my resolve. Even though part of me wanted to stand up to Tina and felt overshadowed by him, my father's support made me feel fearless. As long as he was by my side, I knew I could face anything. An unexpected event shattered my world. I was horrified to learn that my father had collapsed at work. The company staff who reached out to me said he was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Without hesitation, I dashed to the hospital only to find that my mother and sister were nowhere to be seen. "I'm too busy to leave. You'll have to handle Dad's care," my mother said. I was stunned by her response. How could she claim to be too busy when my father's life was at stake? As a younger person, surely, she had more flexibility than I did. What could possibly be more important than being there for my father? In disbelief, I took care of the hospital formalities and listened to the doctor's grim news. My father had acute heart failure and only had a few days left. I visited him as often as I could, hoping to see his smile once more. A few days after his collapse, as if sensing my presence, he breathed lightly and regained consciousness while I held his hand. "I'm so relieved to see you. Do you recognize me? Can you hear my voice?" I pleaded desperately, but he looked at me with a distant, vacant stare before quietly closing his eyes, never to open them again. Until my father passed away, neither my mother nor Tina made any effort to visit him. They only appeared just before the funeral, clearly reluctant to oversee the arrangements. During our conversation there, it became apparent that my father's company had gone bankrupt, leaving behind a $2 million debt. "Inheritance comes with debts," my mother said, her tone dripping with disdain. As the funeral proceeded, both she and Tina began to blame my father for the situation. "He was unreliable in life, and now he's left us with this burden. What a curse," they complained. "What are we supposed to do about all this debt?" My mother wondered aloud. "I have a suggestion," Tina said with a smirk, turning her gaze toward me. "Since Dad had such a soft spot for you, why don't you inherit everything? You can also take on the debt." It's only fair to repay the love you received from him, my mother added, her voice carrying a sense of cold expectation. Unbelievably, my mother and Tina were trying to offload both my father's inheritance and his debts onto me. Despite my father's passing, they were more concerned with their own interests than with mourning his loss. They had always belittled and ridiculed both my father and me, seeing us merely as tools for their game. You can click on Share More to see if there is a part 2.